Hello, welcome to another episode of the Life Capoeira. I'm very pleased to welcome Mestre Fantasma from You Are Capoeira. Welcome, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So you was it formerly East End London Capoeira? It's now You Are Capoeira. How did that get started? How did you get started in capoeira itself? Actually, let's start at the beginning.
Well, I was doing other martial arts, and when I was 18, I decided to try to do something positive in my life, and it was martial arts. Probably, I didn't have a father figure growing up. I was kind of always protected by the big guys at school. I never got bullied or anything, but I always felt as though I couldn't stand up for myself and decided to do martial arts when I was 18. So I was quite thickly into that because I lived in Newcastle and I was unemployed during the Thatcher years. And so it was quite a full-time thing. I ended up teaching it. At the same time as I was advancing in it, I was also getting a little bit bored of it for one reason or another. And I liked the physical training. So then I saw Capoeira. Master Gato was in a workshop I was at, went to his class, and that was it. I changed direction in a moment.
Brilliant. And you hail from Southend-on-Sea. We've had a previous guest, Mestre Tanina, come on and talk about her experiences there. How was capoeira in those early days in the UK?
It was actually really good because it was so new and no one had ever heard of it. And it was great to be involved. I felt like I'd found some kind of special thing that no one knew about. And probably that's why I got into it. So I started in 89 and until about 2000, really, there wasn't that much capoeira in the UK. And back then in like 90, 91, Gato had an interesting group of kind of martial artists that were all training in a car park in Harlem. So I went there because I'd moved to Newcastle just before I met Gato. I moved from Newcastle, sorry, just before I met Gato. And when he said, "Oh, my group's in Harlow," I thought, "Oh, well, that's not too far from me.
Brilliant.
I can zip up there if I get someone to help me." I never had a car, I never drove. So I had a student that had a car and we used to drive up to Harlow and train with the guys in Harlow. And that went on for a year or two before I moved to London. So it was all just rather magical time, really. I would be training with one person outside on Southend Seafront, and then someone come along and said, "Can I do that?" And I said, "Yes." And then the group just built up around us naturally. Yeah.
We've had Mestre Ferragira on as well, a friend of yours, talking about those early days as well, and how, I mean, he estimated there were, when he came over, approximately sort of 50 capoeiristas, whereas I think there's easily these days. How did you then start running your own classes in your own groups?
Well, yeah. Yeah, I had two moments. There was one in Southend and then another one in London. The one in Southend was really simple because I was a friend of mine that I'd known since I was a child came round and saw me doing the Ginga, started teaching him. Someone heard about Simon doing this weird martial art. Someone else joined. Next thing I knew, a little black guy called Jude, who became quite a figure in capoeira at that time. He'd just come out of prison. He was a rapper. He was an ex-boxer, ex-professional boxer, very small, kind of featherweight or something. And he joined my group. And because he was a good dancer and a good character, and everyone knew him in Southend, the next day I had 20, 30 people in my class. So then it all became a rather a challenge to know how to deal with it. But I kept myself in front because I was the one going to train with Pachinho in Harlow or Gatu when he came in the summer. And when we all went as a gang, like 10 of us or something, then when we'd get back, the only one that could remember anything was me. The techniques and the details, like Master Pachinho had taught, or the timing. And that's because I had the martial arts experience. So I became the teacher, but because by accident, basically. And the group formed and I had good students. I had one guy was good with the music, another guy was good at singing. I was the teacher. We were all a bit streetwise, I suppose, for England.
And how do you contrast that with capoeira in the UK today? Because obviously you've been with capoeira now for a very long time. You must have seen a lot of the ebbs and flows of capoeira as it's changed over the decades.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of change, but I'm not sure if it's change or multi-layered, because those other things still exist. I mean, my group's the same as it was. I've basically got a bunch of really keen, quite able guys that love capoeira, and we're all a bit like Arthur Daly or something. It's like really, there's one guy is like that, and that, there's a Jamaican guy, and we're the same more or less. But I did see also through the 90s and more so in 2000, the branding and labels of groups and how the groups expanded within their groups. So it was easy to identify who was from Cordão de Ouro, who was from Angola, who was from Senzala. You could see these kind of groups emerging that had less individual character, but more group character. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
So, but that didn't stop what was already happening. There was, in London, there was still some, Pastel turned up and he was doing his Mercado Modelo Capoeira. Mustache was here from Mestre No, and they all, everyone was still existing, but the contemporary group started to grow bigger, for one reason or another. And it kind of made it multi-layered rather than just, I remember doing Hodders and then everyone would turn up, more or less everyone. So because there was only, as Ferreira said, there was only a handful of people actually doing capoeira. Mestre Zada was there, so it did change, but not really for the worse, but for the better, because there was more people involved, and it became a vehicle for, it seemed that a lot of people started to develop ways to teach in schools and develop the whole kind of way of teaching as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I think as it's grown, it's interesting to see the BBC have had a couple of their little sort of idents featuring just showing that sort of growing sort of popular knowledge of the art.
Yeah, I mean, it was unknown, and really it still is, because we don't have a place for it. It gets put in other boxes. It's a martial art. Oh, it's a dance thing. It's Brazilian martial art. But, is it? Really, it was, the one we practice today is from Bahia, and it's more of a variação. It's not a martial art. So it's capoeira. So for me, it still doesn't have its place.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's we like to pigeonhole things, but obviously I think capoeira is unique. It's a category in and of itself, and I think is it a martial arts? A really good question, because you could also say that actually of some other more traditional martial arts, because the martial side of things is only really going to come out depending on the teacher that you've got and the emphasis they have on their training. I've told my own students that actually, I used to do full contact kung fu, but I didn't like hurting people, which is a big disadvantage in sparring. And so when I teach capoeira, I'll talk about the martial side of things. I'll say, when you're throwing out a kick, if you want it to be at their head, it needs to be at their head, but you want them to get out of the way. But, my lessons will have that element to them, but it's not going to be as big as, say, the playful nature inside of things. But then, Contramestre Negateta, first one comes to mind, is obviously much more martial minded in his teaching. And so, and I've found this again from my Kung Fu experience is, Tai Chi is a moving meditation for some people, but for others, it's still very much a martial art akin to, a karate and others.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is the thing, isn't it? Doesn't have its place. It isn't just a martial art. It isn't just a dance. I feel that the best thing to see it as is a kind of fight game. When if you're a practitioner and you want to play capoeira, I have a thing where I call it Hodder Fear. So my students train and play, and then when we do a Hodder, they say, "Oh, I can't make that day," So, but now our Hodders are quite intensive and they're quite big. So it is, when I say it's big, I mean what I mean is it's quite the energy and feeling of it and the different levels. It does represent what the good hodders I've seen in Brazil. So it's almost like we've done the job. I've done my job basically that I wanted to do, and
Oh,
I never thought I would see that in my lifetime. So now I do this urban ritual, and other people are copying the model, and it's a good hodder. You know, we're having good hodders in London. Mm. So for new people, they come into capoeira, and I think that it's better for them to see a little bit of the fight side when they go in to play, because obviously, even if someone's not trying to kick you, you can walk into a kick because you're not looking or turning in the wrong way or something like this. So for me, it's a fight game, which I suppose sparring is.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's considered violence.
yeah, yeah.
I quite like the phrase. It's a dance for fighters or a fight for dancers,
Yeah.
which actually I think neatly brings us into your rhythmic rope throw. That was more of a tongue twister than I
Yeah.
expect. Rhythm,
Rhythmic rope flow.
because I know that you also into Cuban dance and things, and you've combined your love of dance, your love of capoeira, with a new sort of exercise program. Would you like to talk a bit about that?
Well, I mean, that's quite a good thing for me right now because of because of its impact on my body, basically. I got involved with Cuban dance kind of by accident. I was just interested in Matthias Assunção, the historian. He once said to me, in the future, we'll find out more about capoeira roots looking into other activities in other places. So then I stumbled across Cuban rumba in in Havana, and there was one guy here in London who was a really it's like a master, you know. I became friends with him, started learning a little bit of music. Then I met my partner Luanda, and we started going to Cuba once a year to do a dance fest. And I started getting into the dance. So a lot of the movements from the Orisha dance are really similar to the way I understand the capoeira ginga. So, you know, these things really connected for me. And the the influence it had was kind of a confirmation of many things that I'd already thought about how the movement and the music need to be in connected. You know, not the movements isn't separate from the music, but the music, the song, and the movement all fit together. Um, and being involved with the Cuban stuff, really, because they have it's quite an open religious ceremonies, and they have this rumba that they do shows. But basically, Fidel Castro kind of got them on his side when he took power and just made it and gave them money just to develop. You know, so in Brazil, people were being so it was still marginalized in the 60s, even when I went there in the 90s. But in Cuba, they were actually being given places to teach and money to survive and tours to do around the world with folkloric dance. And so, you know, they were really supported quite well for it. So the similarities for me were really interesting and helped me develop my own style. And that's why I called it You Are Capoeira, because it's like urban ritual and You Are Capoeira. So then in lockdown, I stumbled across the rope flow from David Weck in America, who's a kind of inventor of different forms of exercise to improve your ability and not, yeah, to prove your ability of whatever you do. And rope flow is one of the things that I liked from his teachings. And the way that they do it, it doesn't have formed dance steps within it. So then accidentally, I kind of discovered that the basic principles of the Cuban dance that I'd learned really helped my idea of rope flow. And I started really getting into it. Also, it was really difficult to do one. There were some moves I couldn't do on one side and I could do on the other. And I really noticed how the right hand compensated for the left. Or if I brought the left up, then that means that I bring the right down, if you know what I mean. So you get this balance. So ended up that all the little injuries that I've had for years, that sometimes I would feel walking home after teaching, disappeared. Everything. I had a little pain in my neck, disappeared. thing in my ankle used to come more or less every time I talk. Afterwards, I could feel a little thing in my ankle. I go to bed. When I wake up, it's gone. But now it's gone. And I think it's the road flux. It's the only thing I've done that's been, that's the only thing that's changed. So for me, I'm developing rope flow as a rhythmic rope flow because there's quite a lot of it on the internet. You can find like lots of moves. But the way I'm doing it's more like a Jenga. So there's the whole bodies thing, and there's certain things that really fit for the Jenga. And now I use it for people that arrive at capoeira that want to do capoeira but actually aren't fit enough and doesn't have that coordination. They're not able really to get the class without going home aching and thinking, oh, it's not for me. So now I give them a rope, or they buy a rope. And once you've got that rope in your house, providing you've got a space, then you can have a little go whenever you want. And you end up, the thing with it is that it's a figure of 8 movement in the shoulders that really helps the back. And then it's the arm twisting as well. And those two things combined with the bit I added, which is the kind of bounce. We call it the bounce, but it's a drop. It's ended up that students that have been struggling with me to get my type of Jenga, get the rope, achieve lots with the rope, and then they feel, oh, okay, I can do it in capoeira, and they've actually grown in capoeira as well. So I'm just finding it as a really interesting prop.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
It
That's
is. It's super interesting. And the other thing as well is like I've done a bit boxing. So boxers, they always have a dominant side, and they always use skipping for balance. So you're doing something that's equal. So this is the same, except you've got all this shoulder rotation and like walking, and you can use it like batting or throwing or hitting, and you can do lots of different things with it. So it's just becoming a fantastic prop.
It sounds like a really good bit of cross training as well, and particularly you were talking about how we've got to have that dominant side, and with the rope, you're finding that your right hand could do it, your left couldn't, and then you're sort of building up. Because
Yeah.
obviously, being right or left-handed, we tend to, as our life goes on, we end up being more asymmetric because one side of our body ends up doing more, and this sounds like a really good way to compensate for that.
And apparently, David Weck has done some kind of experiments and tests with it. And there's some moves when you have to do right hand and then left hand and then right hand. And this one mustn't move when you do that, or the rope changes position and it doesn't look as good. So you have to go right, left, right. And this independence has actually helped my pandeiro playing, because the pandeiro you shake with this hand and hit with this hand, and so many people hold it with this hand and do nothing else. So, or just one thing, So my pandeiro and my drumming and my berimbau plans all improved because I'm playing rope, because I can independently move the cabasa now. It's quite interesting.
Yeah. I come at the end of, I forget which film it is, it's Jackie Chan doing a little party trick where he is drawing a circle in the air with one hand, and then at a similar sort of pace, he's drawing out a square with his other hand. And
Okay.
I wonder if the rope would help learn that little trick, because obviously it's really hard to have that independence with your arms, and it's really interesting to hear how the rope is helping with that.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting kind of addition, because one of the things that's happened in the last, well, since I started capoeira, is I saw a lot of people doing lots of different things to support their body for capoeira. So yoga, and then there's these kind of contact improvisation and other movements that people have been doing. And probably it really works well. But for me, the rope represents the ginga and the music. It's very much like capoeira for me. So it's just another one of those things that maybe can help people have a longer capoeira life for their body, really.
Yeah, which I think we all need. Um, So you're recently back from a capoeira event in Berlin, and how did that go? Have you had any reflections on the event?
Oh, yeah, that was. I was going to Berlin for another reason completely, nothing to do with this event. But then bumped into Gunso, who had been visiting Urban Ritual a few times in Brighton when Master Claudio was here. And I said, oh, I'm going to be in Berlin. And he said, oh, when? And I told him, and it was when his event was, so he gave me one class. So that went really well, I thought. I'm still waiting for feedback from the students, but from what I understood, what I was teaching, they really liked. And I met Mestre Fantasma. I can't say his name properly. And he's an interesting character and caught me by surprise, really. First of all, we really got on. I think when you speak Portuguese so fluently and you've been in capoeira for like 30 years or so, it does help. And it's kind of nice for me to meet an older Brazilian master. And for them, it's nice for them to meet a white guy that speaks, like, acts like he's a capoeirista, you know. So we really got on. But he surprised me completely with a presentation, more or less what is capoeira. But he didn't actually say what it is. He just said, where does it, you know, how vast is the subject of where it might have come from, kind of, and what influences it. And so that was just a really high point for me. The way he presented it in particular, I was quite surprised by it. Also, I saw Torcinho and Toca. Toca is Copania's brother, and he kind of started capoeira in London. And he was here, I think it's 10 years now. He went to Berlin and he's developed what seems to be a really good hodder in Berlin. I mean, he doesn't say, but I reckon he copied an Urban Ritual. So it was just fantastic to be there by accident.
Yeah, that's really good stroke of luck. The last question I like to ask on this podcast with all my guests, which I think then will probably help with, is what is capoeira?
Well, there's no simple answer to that. I think it's lots of different things to everyone. You know, everyone's at different phases. So depending in which phase you're at, you can see it as something different. Also, the kind of influence of the master or the group changes what it is. So, you know, some groups are more movement based, other groups maybe are more maybe more spiritual or connected to some other kind of search within themselves. Some seem, although haven't seen any recently, but I've seen videos, they've seemed a bit more like almost like karate or fighting and kind of going in there, kind of jujitsu, almost, you know, they jingo, do a few things and then they want to grab each other. So this, you know, there's so many different forms of it that it can't be defined, and unless you want to pin it down to one part, you know. If you want to say, well, what about Bahian capoeira, you know, and then you can talk about the history of Bahian capoeira, or, you know, Mestre Bimba's capoeira, or Mestre Valdemar's capoeira, and look into the kind of what it is, what it was, or what it is for those people. But for me, it kind of saved my life, really. You know, it became a subject of study that satisfied all my kind of needs, gave me a good social network, but most importantly, my students become my family. So really, capoeira is not like my family.
Lovely. That's also made me think of another question. I remember quite some time ago on Facebook, you posted a comment, is there a new style of capoeira, sort of European capoeira? And I want to feel if that's the case, or such earlier comments that, you know, the hodders here now are of a sort of similar quality to hodders in Brazil itself. Is
Not all of them.
Oh yeah, of course, but
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I do believe I saw things. No, I don't believe. I saw some things change. So, and they probably still, it's probably still like that, but there's a lot more acceptance of people not doing it exactly how they're being asked to. So it seems to be formed a new way to play the music, for example, often quite slow, and for me, quite monotonous, because people don't know the songs. They don't come from that culture, and they probably haven't spent the time practicing, trying to develop what the master's been teaching. So in Brazil, what I saw was quite a strict kind of hierarchy. So and it's the same in Cuba, Cuban rumba and music. If you can't make the right sounds, you don't get the chance to try. You know, if you're bashing the instrument and making a noise, when you go to play in the batteria, the masters take you off politely or impolitely, often politely. But, you know, it's not easy to play these instruments like the berimbau, pandero, especially, and drum. So those things really should be practiced, I think, so that you can make the sounds you want. And then you need some sort of musical guidance to really have good music in the Honda. So I think that there has been developed a kind of mediocre version of the music that's been now accepted and recorded, and it's got its place. But for me, if I listen to Valdemar, Bimba, Casara, all those guys from before that recorded early, they seem to be playing, first of all, with a different rhythm, slightly more rhythmical, with this kind of bouncy feeling. And often they sing in tune to the berimbau, or they've tuned the berimbau to their voice. And that's kind of been lost, I think, in the majority of places, not everywhere, but in the majority of places. And it is difficult to have a berimbau that you tune to your voice. And then you've got 3 berimbaus. So you've got to find a way to blend the 4 voices, the one of the human singing and the 3 of the berimbaus, because they've each got a voice. And it's a part of the capoeira that I really believe is the most important part, is trying to get your music right. So I think I was probably talking about the music. I mean, people say they don't like my music, so, and I say why, and they say, oh, we just, you know, it's too fast or something. And I said, well, maybe it's because you can't play that fast. You know, you don't feel relaxed playing that fast. It's a struggle. But it's all technical detail. You know, I learned a lot of music with different people. But one of my first few influences from Group Senzala, Mestre Fantasma, Sorriso, Garrincha, and they all played quite rhythmically and sang well. So, you know, Pachinha didn't sing much, but he did sing well. And then I met Nenel, and eventually I ended up with Boca Hica. And when I met Boca Hica, he really kind of made me realize that your hands move independently, you know. And I was lucky enough to travel with him enough to pick up a few techniques. And since then, I've always have been lucky in my musical pursuits. Still working on it. I think that's the main thing that I see has different. And because the music's changed, that affects the movement and the whole feeling in the room. You know, there's the heart of capoeira is really the music and the song is the main singer. So, you know, I see the differences, but I accept as well. Everyone can do whatever they want, and most people are trying to get better at what they're doing. So it's a journey, but there is a difference. There's one guy I know in Salvador, and he's a master of capoeira, and he said to me, the influence of Europe has come back to Bahia. And I said, what do you mean? He said, now, this was like 15 years ago. He said, now they get the DVDs with the European capoeira and copy it because they think that that's what the Europeans want. So they don't want to do the traditional stuff. So he's trying to teach them traditional sequences and, you know, be calm and all that. And they're seeing like really fast kicks and trying to throw each other. And they want to do that. They don't want to do the old traditional stuff. So, you know, that's a first-hand example. It's definitely not only is there formed a European capoeira, or let's say outside of Brazil capoeira, that's actually gone back to Brazil and affected how capoeira is practiced in Brazil, or not practiced in Brazil, but played in Brazil. You know, it's a conundrum. Everyone's going in their own ways as well. Everyone can choose.
I think it's a bit like in social media with audience capture, where you get an influencer who does something that's a bit different to the norm, but that gets them lots of hits, and so then that influences them to sort of steer in a new direction. and obviously with the proliferation of easy access to videos from all over the world on YouTube and Facebook and TikTok and whatnot, it will be interesting to see how things evolve. And actually, whereas before, Europe was more isolated from Brazil, but
Mm,
now everything's just mixing together, and obviously it's not just Europe. There's the Americas and
mm,
Australasia.
yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just developed a lot, and they're very quite quickly. It's very quick how in 20 years it's just exploded. And a lot of that was based on opportunity rather than planning. And so now we kind of I do see people, they've got a different look on it. They've been here 10 years and now they want to change something. Before they didn't really, it just kind of ran off with them. And now they're trying to form that into something more resembling more what they learned when they were in Brazil before. So, this it's just a work in progress, I think.
Yeah. So if any of our listeners are in London that would like to train with Mestre Fantasma, would you like to just talk about your group and where people can find you?
Okay. Well, at the moment I'm teaching in more or less in the street, but it's indoors in the street near King's Cross, in a place called Granary Square. And I've got a website, capoeira.co.uk. So on there is updated, and you can see where I am. But in September, I'm going to start in a Cuban Dance Academy, which is actually a ballet academy. But they're opening the doors to all forms of dance. And it's Carlos Acosta's, it's called the Acosta Dance Center. So I'll be teaching there as well. So
Good luck with that.
yeah, let's see how that goes. I've never really taught in an academy of such. So suddenly I'm in like almost like a palace, and I intend to make it work as best I can. I'll be teaching rope flow and capoeira Angola there. So starting September, I'm teaching a lot.
Brilliant. And are there any other sort of closing thoughts or comments you'd like to say?
Well, I suppose if there's new capoeiristas, the, the trick, I believe, of developing good understanding and a way to play is to visit different hodders so that you can kind of value what you've been learning. I think that one of the most important things that I have done for my students is to make sure that we are exposed to different forms of capoeira, different masters and different ideas, and play as many people as from different places, people you don't know. Playing people you know is not necessarily as good as playing someone you don't know. Maybe that's what I want to say.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. We'll be linking to the website in the description to this episode as well. And if you'd like to get in touch with podcast with a life capoeira at gmail.com, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook. So thank you very much for listening. And until next time, ciao.